Hi students! I wanted to do a video to go over the study guide for the Yellow Wallpaper. So here we are. So first I wanted to just give you a little background on Charlotte Perkins Gilman, the author. So there's a fantastic biography in literature and its writers. But in addition to that, I thought I would just give you this from Britannica, which I thought was good. So Charlotte Perkins Gilman was born in 1860 in Hartford, Connecticut, and she died in 1935. So she was known, in addition to being a writer, also to being a feminist, lecturer, and very active in women's rights movement. All right, and so she she grew up very humble means and in poverty, basically. Her father had unfortunately abandoned the family. Her education was irregular and limited, but as it says in Britannica, but she did attend the Rhode Island School of Design for a time. And so in 1884, she married Charles Stetson, who was an artist. And so they were kind of just a connection that didn't work as far as marriage. They just weren't well suited to one another. And so it just really didn't work out all that well. So she did go through an experience that we would now term postpartum depression, but at the time there was no medical understanding of postpartum depression. There was no medical term for that. There was no medical understanding of the issue at all. So she did suffer symptoms that we would now term that, but again, at that time, there was not an understanding of that. So she did try to advocate for herself. She went to doctors who would describe her symptoms. One of the doctors she went to described her as very arrogant because it's like she was advocating for herself, and that was really out of her place to do, is what he thought at the time. She has a well-known relative. Her aunt was Harriet Beecher Stowe. So think for a minute of where have you heard that name before? What did Harriet Beecher Stowe write? Very famous American novel, Harriet Beecher Stowe. This was her aunt. And it was Uncle Tom's Cabin. So her aunt wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was, it's a classic work that was considered at the time radically anti-slavery. And so the doctor actually made this comment to Charlotte Perkins Gilman that he'd had her type in here before, that she was a little too much for him as far as trying to advocate for herself and what she was going through. So no solution in sight. She was given what she said was essence of oats, which the only thing I can make sense of that is some kind of oatmeal. And so nothing really helped. And so there is an essay in the book, in literature and its writers, right next to, depending on the version that you have, if it's one of the later versions, it's right next to the story, and it's called Undergoing the Cure for Nervous Prostration. That was written by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and it was her description of what she really went through in her life, that she based. The story is fiction, but it's based in her experience that she went through. So in her real life, she said that she noticed that when she was away from home, she felt better, and that when she was at home, she felt worse. So her solution, which seemed to work for her honestly, was to get a divorce and move to California. So it worked for her really, because she did not blame her husband at all. She said that, in fact, there's a biography I read of hers that really goes into how much he tried to, really was supportive, and all that he tried to do to kind of make things work and help her during this unnamed illness, that he went above and beyond. But they just were kind of a mismatch. They just didn't seem to be meant to be married. So at any rate, she left, she moved to California, and she felt better. So she was very, very, very ahead of her time. She was insistent that they had a daughter, that their daughter be allowed to spend time with both parents, even though they were now living on separate coasts. And so they would sort of travel by train at certain times so that the daughter could now spend time with her father or with her mother, and they shared custody, which was just, the whole thing was just so radical for its time. She went on to, she was a lecturer, she was a women's rights activist, she continued to write and all of that. So she did eventually get married again, and her second marriage was very, very happy, and, very, they were, very long lasting. It lasted until first, he died, and then, she was, diagnosed, with terminal cancer at a certain point, and she had seen that her mother had also, had a terminal illness, and Charlotte, had helped her mother through this terminal illness. Her father had also a terrible lingering illness before his death. And so she had decided for herself that if she were diagnosed with a terrible illness and that she had done all that she could, that she would not suffer on and on endlessly, that she'd rather end her life than that. So she was diagnosed with terminal cancer at a certain point, and she went through all of the treatments. She very much wanted to live. She went through all of the treatments, but there's a certain point that nothing more could be done. And when it got to the point that she was suffering and she was in pain, she did not want to put her daughter through what she had been through, with her own mother, with kind of the same experience. So she did, in a planned way, we would call it euthanasia today, she did decide to end her life. Because she was suffering with terminal cancer, not because she was depressed, because she was suffering from terminal cancer, and that was her conscious decision. She left, her family was aware of the issue, and in fact, she wrote a letter to the editor of the newspaper about her decision to be published after her death. That's Charlotte Perkins Gilman. All right, and there's, more than that, and she's a fascinating figure, but that, in a nutshell, gives you, I think, an overview of her. So the Yellow Wallpaper is probably today her best known work, but she's also known for a work called Women in Economics, which is also pretty well known, in which she advocates for an equal division of labor, that childcare should be shared between the spouses and things like that. And she was just far ahead of her time, if that hasn't become clear already, right? And then there was something else I was going to tell you about her, but I can't remember. Oh, she wrote and published her own magazine that was quite successful for a long time, and so that was women's rights articles, things like that. That she was, it was well received and it was very successful. All right, so that gives you an overview of her, and I want to go through the questions. So it says, number 1 in the study guide, describe the room to which the narrator is confined. You should be able to describe the room in the house. Now, always the quizzes are on the story, right? Not on the movie. I hope the movie was helpful. I think they did a really good job with this movie, the PBS movie. And I like some of the sound effects and the special effects and the eyes coming through the, the wallpaper and all that. But you're being quizzed, of course, as always, on the story. So it says, describe the room to which the narrator is confined. You should be really specifically able to describe it. I'm not going to go into the whole thing right now because this is the review, and you should, I can't just hand it to you, right? But, the bars on the windows, right? The bed nailed down to the floor, etc., etc. You should be able to describe the room. So in that case, just to be clear, the question and the evidence are intertwined, because in describing the room, you are giving evidence, right? I mean, if you just said something like, well, it was a bedroom, well, that is really not specific, right? So be specific, get all your points, right? All right, number 2, describe how does the narrator's description of the wallpaper change over time? So the way she starts describing the wallpaper, right, it changes, right, throughout the story. So you should be able to answer this. How specifically does it change throughout the story? Okay, so I'll leave you with that. I'll let you look that up if you have forgotten. Number 3, could the story have taken place in any other place or time? Why or why not? Explain specifically. So, you don't want to just say, well, yes or no. You want to say, yes, I think it could, and here's why. No, I don't think it could have, and here's why. So you're not being graded on your opinion, of course. You're being graded on your ability to support your opinion with evidence, right? So for example, if you say yes, it could take place in another place and time, you might talk about that. Well, clearly no one is given what was called the rest cure at the time. That was, I think I forgot to mention that in the biography. That was an actual cure, that was thought to be medically sound at the time, that it was thought that women would get too sort of overly excited about, they were thought to have excitable emotions, and if they got too mentally taxed and overly excited, they thought to calm them down, they needed to be in a room, just a room, with no mental stimulation. So you couldn't read, you couldn't like paint, you couldn't, nothing artistic, nothing creative. You couldn't even talk to people. You could just sit in your room and do nothing. So that clearly drove women crazy. So seriously, it caused the cure was worse than often whatever the issue was, and so this was wildly problematic, but it was actually thought to be a medically sound cure at the time. So supposedly, it's thought that there's some evidence to support the idea that Charlotte Perkins Gilman's story may have shifted. The doctor who came up with that cure, his name was S. Weir Mitchell, may have shifted his ideas about this rest cure. So there you go. So at any rate, but could the story have taken place in any other time or place? So if you say yes, you might explain that women today still struggle with what we now term postpartum depression. Some women struggle with that, and some are not correctly diagnosed. Even with the medical technology we have today, sometimes people fall through the cracks. And it can be anyone. For example, Brooke Shields, the actress, wrote a book about 15 years ago called Down Came the Rain, about her experience not being able to get a correct diagnosis, or because of the lack of correct diagnosis, not correct medication either, for when she herself had postpartum depression approximately 15 years ago. So that was in modern times, and she's a famous actress, so she had certainly had resources more than probably the average person, and yet this happened to her. And there are of course, a lot of women that don't have adequate resources that this is happening to. So that could be a yes answer, and you would give an example, a specific example, if you knew someone that had experienced that, or you can use the Brooke Shields example, I guess, just be specific, right? And then, but that, if you're saying no, then you might explain how the rest cure is not given today, that we have moved past that we do have adequate resources, in most cases for the diagnosis of postpartum depression. But then I want you to be specific and give specific details and evidence to that. So I'm not going to hand all this to you, but all right, fine. Let's see. Let's go into number 4. Why does the narrator say, what can one do? How does that statement represent her state of mind? She says that a lot throughout the story. She'll explain what she wants to do or what's happening, and then she'll just say, but what can one do? So why does she say that? Why do you think she says that? It seems like a particularly helpless sort of phrase. So you need to explain from your understanding why she says that, and then give evidence from the text to support your idea. I just to give you a little kind of heading in some kind of direction with that, it does seem like a helpless phrase, and it seems like when she has tried to advocate for herself, saying what she would like to do, what she knows she needs, she's never listened to, like, ever. I mean, she doesn't really even she never wanted that awful room in the first place, right? She wanted a different room, and that she's not listened to, right? I mean, so like, she continually, in her own way, tries to advocate for herself, but she's never listened to. And so finally it just becomes, well, what can one do, right? I mean, the one that I find the most heartbreaking in the story is when she says, but Well, John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in a marriage. And it's like, it's like, oh my gosh, that would make you feel like, what can one do, right? That she's totally just, nothing she tries ever seems to work out for advocating for herself. So there you go. All right, so let's look at number 5. Compare the narrator in the Yellow Wallpaper to the character of Mrs. Mallard in The Story of an Hour. What are their similarities and differences? So you should be able to do that. I want to make clear again, in Mrs. Mallard, The Story of an Hour, in the actual story, there is no evidence that she cannot leave the house. So please don't talk about her not leaving the house in The Story of an Hour. There is no evidence of that. It was only that director's take on it in the movie. So just to be clear. Okay, but in the Yellow Wallpaper, of course, the character is confined to a room. So there is a confinement issue there. All right, number 6. Would you recommend the Yellow Wallpaper to a friend? Why or why not? So you want to avoid just saying yes, no, maybe. Yes, no, or maybe is fine, but you need to explain why, and you need to give a specific example of why you would recommend it to this person, or why you would not recommend this, or whatever, right? So if you would recommend it, maybe it's, to someone that did struggle with postpartum depression. You think that they might be able to connect with it on some level, but then give a specific example from the text and from the situation that you're advocating for. If you want to say no, you might say, I don't know, that maybe it would depress someone. I don't know, someone that was going through this, maybe that would depress them. I don't know. But you want to just be specific and, like, give it a good go. I mean, don't just kind of surface level, yeah, no, maybe, whatever, right? Okay, so just be specific. All right. And then next it says, number 7, why do you think the Yellow Wallpaper is considered to be essential reading in feminist literature? What are the qualities of the story that make it representative of issues that women may have experienced? Okay, so you just want to, it is considered to be essential reading in most feminist literature programs. So you want to just explain why you think that might be. I'll just give you like a few perhaps issues of, I like women's rights. I mean, so she didn't clearly have, again, this took place before women had the right to vote, before women had the right to own property. In many states, women could not divorce their husbands. So clearly, Charlotte Perkins Gilman was ahead of all that, right? Also, she had a spouse who wasn't trying to stop her from that either. So, he was rather ahead of his time as well. So, and she says in the essay that's next to the story that there was no blame on either side, that she didn't blame him for anything and he didn't blame her, but still it just wasn't working out. So, which is a very modern thinking, but this took place, of course, quite a long time ago. So, there's that. So, women's rights, of course, but also this idea of women not being listened to by doctors is actually still a concern that can be going on today. So, there's something about that as well. I'll let you kind of think about that. Maybe that can keep you in the right direction. Do use evidence from the story and from whatever you are referring to. All right, so 8. Why does the narrator have no name? So in the movie, they call her Charlotte, but not in the story, right? So in the story, she is like the boss in Bartleby, right? Of course, she has a name, I guess, but we are never told her name. She's unnamed. Why? Why do you think that is? Why? So I'm going to let you have your ideas about that and then use evidence from the text. All right, and number 9, what is wrong with the narrator? What is wrong with her? So I'm going to explain and talk about this briefly. Again, I mentioned before that she has the symptoms of what we would now term as postpartum depression. Okay, so that is postpartum, meaning after birth, and depression, right? So that is certainly an acceptable answer, postpartum depression. At the time, they called it a couple of different things. Again, it was not postpartum depression. They were calling a couple different things because they didn't know what she had. But any kind of emotional, mental health issue that they thought that was what it was, they often termed it as as nervous prostration was one, or there's another name, hysteria, women's hysteria or nervous prostration. That was what they termed it at the time. But again, there was no understanding of the issue of just any kind of emotional or mental health issue was for women was often termed by those three things. So you do need what was, I don't mean just what was wrong with her. She was confined to a room. That was what was wrong with her. You could argue, but I mean, what was she suffering from other than the treatment? So again, postpartum depression is what we think she had, or you could say nervous prostration or women's hysteria from the 19th century terminology. All right, so what is the, and then you should give evidence to that too from the story. All right, so moving on. What is the significance of the color yellow in the story? It is called the yellow wallpaper. So thinking about that, is it a happy, cheerful yellow? Not so much, right? It's I think of it as kind of a jaundiced sort of yellow. So what do you think? I mean, there's no right or wrong, but there is being able to support your answer with evidence from the text, right? So what do you think? Number 11, what is the significance of the ending of the story? So you should know that she is not sane at the end. She has taken a break with sanity. By the time she is crawling around the room, right, you know, her husband has fainted when he sees her, and she crawls over him and all of that. She is no longer sane. She has totally had a break with sanity. So you should know that, and you know, it could be that you know, the significance can, one idea could be how horrifying really this treatment was, that she knew what she needed. She knew she needed to be able to write and read and do and have social interaction and all of this, and she got nothing of that, right? So she, you know, the treatment, she had a condition of some sort. The treatment made it invariably worse. So it's likely that she went from postpartum depression to postpartum psychosis is what likely has occurred here. So you know, you should know the end. You should know the end, and you should understand the ending and show that you know how the story ends, and that you understand it. All right, so that is our review of the Yellow Wallpaper, and that's it. All right.